Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh. Testing, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. What'd you say?
Do you have one in or two?
One. Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Subcommittee will come to order. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for being with us. Chairman Young has been unavoidably detained and will perhaps join us later. He asked me to proceed and welcome everybody on his behalf. This morning, the subcommittee will hold an open hearing on the posture and budget request of the Department of Navy. We'll focus on Navy and Marine Corps personnel training and equipment readiness, and we'll also touch on acquisition issues to gain insights into the department's priorities and decision-making. I'd like to welcome Secretary of the Navy, Ray Mabus, Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral John Greenert, and Commandant of the Marine Corps, General James Amos. Welcome to you all. General Amos, we missed having you with us last year, but General Dunford filled in for you very ably, and we recently saw him in his new role as Commander of the International Security Assistance in U.S. Forces Afghanistan. And General Amos, on behalf of our entire committee, we extend to you and the Corps our greatest sympathy at the loss of your another 2 Marines, and we recognize the loss to their families and to the Corps, as we do obviously the loss of other soldiers in recent weeks. So on behalf of the committee, we extend our greatest sympathy to you and the Marine Corps.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate that. I'll pass that to my Marine.
Please do. Thank you all for being here today. I'm sure I can safely speak for every member of this subcommittee in thanking you for your service to our great nation. Gentlemen, we look forward to hearing how you will be able to craft a workable budget for fiscal year 2014, although we understand that it remains very much a work in progress, depending on how the sequestration reductions are absorbed in fiscal year 2013. We are all very concerned with the state of the Navy's shipbuilding program. The Navy's new stated requirement for fleet size stands at 306 ships, down from the long-stated but never achieved fleet size of 313 ships. The long-term shipbuilding forecast submitted with this budget shows that the Navy will reach its requirement of 306 ships in 2037, a full quarter of a century in the future. It seems that every year the subcommittee is assured that the shipbuilding plan is sufficient for our nation's requirements, and just as frequently the satisfaction of those requirements shift further into the future. Secretary Mabus, you've been quoted as saying that the Navy has placed 43 ships under contract since you've been in office. But a good portion of those ships don't seem to be the classic combatants, such as large cruisers, guided missile destroyers, or submarines normally associated with the U.S. Navy's dominance. While some of these ships certainly are the classic type, several of them are small combatants like the littoral combat ship, or auxiliary ships like the mobile landing platform, or transport vessels like the joint high-speed vessel. In other words, to our way of thinking, support ships. There are likely even a couple of oceanographic research vessels being counted. Also of concern in this request is the incremental funding of a Virginia-class submarine. There have been 18 Virginia-class submarines appropriated and authorized prior to this one. We fail to see what makes this submarine so special and critical that it requires you to violate your own long-standing full funding policy that is spelled out so clearly in your own financial management regulations. Incremental funding of end items equates to buying merchandise on a credit card and letting balances accumulate. Since the practice started with aircraft carriers several years ago, it certainly has not resulted in the Navy's ability to purchase more ships. In fact, we'd say the opposite is true. In this case, $950 million of fiscal year 2015 funding that could go to purchase new equipment will now be required to pay off the Navy's fiscal year 2014 debt, accumulated as a result of incrementally funding this submarine. This will be further exacerbated by the sequestration, as we understand that $300 million of the requirements for fiscal year 2013 submarines have been deferred to the out years and will require payment in future years. Additional out-year requirements will most certainly result from other shipbuilding programs as a result of sequestration, further eroding what the Navy can purchase in the future. We think these times of budget uncertainty more than ever will require budget discipline and not such funding devices. Despite all of these challenges, as we've always done in the past, this subcommittee will work hard to ensure that the Department of Navy is ready and able to conduct the very important missions you've been given. This year, more than ever, we will have to work together to ensure the best result possible is achieved. So, we welcome you. We look forward to your comments and a very informative question and answer session. Now let me turn to our ranking member, Mr. Veslowski, for any comments or statements he'd like to make. Mr. Veslowski.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I would associate myself with the Chair's remarks. Thank the gentlemen for their service and welcome you to the committee today. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Veslowski, members of the committee, first, let me thank you all for your unwavering support for the Department of the Navy, our sailors, our Marines, our civilians, and their families. General Amos, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and Admiral Greenert, Chief of Naval Operations, and I could not be prouder to represent those steadfast and courageous sailors, Marines, and civilians. No matter what missions are given them, no matter what hardships are asked of them, these men and women serve their nation around the world with skill and dedication. In the past year, the Navy and Marine Corps team has continued to conduct the full range of military operations, from combat in Afghanistan to security cooperation missions in the Pacific to disaster recovery operations on the streets of Staten Island. Sailors and Marines have gotten the job done. As the United States transitions from 2 land wars in Central Asia to the maritime-centric defense strategy announced 16 months ago, our naval forces will be critical in the years ahead. This strategy, which focuses on the Western Pacific, the Arabian Gulf, and continuing to build partnerships around the globe, requires a forward-deployed, flexible, multi-mission force that is the Navy and Marine Corps, America's away team. Within this strategy, we have to balance our missions with our resources. We're working under Secretary Hagel's leadership on a strategic choices and management review to assess how we deal with the budget uncertainty facing the department as we go forward. 2013 has been hard because we began the fiscal year operating under a continuing resolution that gave us little room to be strategic and to prioritize, limiting our ability to manage the Navy and Marine Corps through this new fiscal reality. Thanks to the efforts of this committee and your congressional colleagues, we have an appropriations bill for this fiscal year, but sequestration is still forcing us to make across-the-board cuts totaling more than $4 billion from our operations and maintenance accounts and about $6 billion from our investment accounts. These cuts will have real impacts. We have prioritized combat operations in Central Command and deployments to Pacific Command. However, we've had to cancel a number of deployments to Southern Command. In order to maintain our priority deployments in 2013 and 14 to meet the Global Force Management Allocation Plan, funding shortfalls will cause our unit at home to cut back training and maintenance. Pilots will get less flight time, ships will have less time at sea, and Marines less time in the field. It will take longer for repair parts to arrive when needed. Our facilities ashore will be maintained at a much lower level. The Department's 2014 budget request is a return to a measured budget approach, one based on strategy that protects the warfighter by advancing the priorities that I've referred to as 4 Ps: people, platforms, power, and partnerships. We're working to make sure that our people are resilient and strong after more than a decade of very high operations tempo with programs like 21st Century Sailor and Marine. With this, we aim to bring all the efforts on protection and readiness, fitness, inclusion, and continuum of service together as one coherent whole. This encompasses a wide range of issues from preventing sexual assault and suicide to fostering a culture of fitness, to strengthening the force through diversity, to ensuring a successful transition following 4 years of service or 40. In the Marine Corps, we continue decreasing manpower to meet our new end strength of just over 182,000 by fiscal year 16. But we're doing this in a way which keeps faith with Marines and helps retain the right level of non-commissioned officers and field grade officers and their experience. We're also working to make sure that our sailors and Marines have the tools and platforms they need to do the missions they are given. One of the most important of these is our fleet. As you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, the Navy of today has 47 ships under contract. For a little history, on September 11th, 2001, the U.S. Navy had 316 ships. By 2008, after one of the largest military buildups in American history, that number was 278. In 2008, the Navy put only 3 ships under contract. Far too few to maintain the size of the fleet or our industrial base, and many of our shipbuilding programs were over budget, behind schedule, or both. One of my main priorities as Secretary has been to reverse those trends. Today, the fleet is stabilized, and the problems in most of our shipbuilding programs have been corrected or arrested. We today, as I said, have 47 ships under contract, 43 of which were contracted since I took office, as you pointed out. And our current shipbuilding plan puts us on track for 300 ships in our fleet by 2019. The way we power our ships and installations has always been a core and vital issue for the Department of the Navy. We continue to lead in energy as we have throughout our history. From sail to coal to oil to nuclear, the Navy has led in moving to new sources of power, and every single time it's made us a better warfighting force. Today, from Marines making power in the field to alternatives on land, on and under the sea, and in the air, the Navy and Marine Corps are powering innovations that will maintain our operational edge. Building partnerships, building interoperability and capacity and capability in our partners is a crucial component of our defense strategy. The strategy directs that this be done in a low-cost, small footprint, innovative way. This is precisely what the Navy and Marine Corps do. The process that we used to craft the Department's budget request was determined, deliberate, and dedicated our responsibility to you and to the taxpayer. And like both the House and Senate budget resolutions, we do not assume that sequestration will continue in fiscal year 14. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, the budget we are submitting supports the defense strategy. It preserves the readiness of our people, and it builds on the success we've achieved in shipbuilding. For 237 years, our maritime warriors have established a proven record as an agile and adaptable force. Forward deployed, we remain the most responsive option to defend the American people and our interests. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Admiral Greenert, good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Visclosky, distinguished members of the committee, it's my pleasure to appear before you today to testify on the Navy's fiscal year 2014 budget and its posture. I'm honored to represent 613,000 active and reserve sailors, Navy civilians, and families who are serving today. This morning I'll address 3 points: our enduring tenets for decision-making, our budget strategy for 2013 and the subsequent carryover from 13 to 14, and our intended course for 2014. 2 important characteristics of our naval forces describe our mandate: that we will operate forward where it matters and that we will be ready when it matters. Our fundamental approach to meeting this responsibility remains unchanged. We organize, man, train, and equip the Navy by viewing our decisions through 3 lenses, or what I call tenets. And they are warfighting first, operate forward, and be ready. Regardless of the size of our budget or our fleet, these are the 3 tenets or the lens through which we will evaluate each of our decisions. If you refer to the chart provided in front of you, you'll see that on any given day, we have about 50,000 sailors and 100 ships deployed overseas, providing forward presence. The orange bow ties on the chart represent maritime crossroads, where shipping lanes and our security concerns intersect. A unique strength of your fleet is that it operates forward from U.S. bases, represented by circles there, and from places provided by partner nations, which are represented by squares. These places are critical to your Navy being where it matters because they enable us to respond rapidly to crises, enable us to sustain forward presence with fewer ships by reducing the number of ships on rotational deployment. In February, we faced a shortfall of about $8.6 billion in our FY 2013 operations and maintenance account. Since then, thanks to the effort of this committee in particular, we received a 2013 appropriation in March. In accordance with our priorities and our tenets, we plan to invest our remaining 2013 O&M funds to fund our must-pay items such as contracts, leases, and utilities and reimbursables, to reconcile the 2013 presence with our combatant commanders, and to conduct training and maintenance for forces next to deploy, and to prepare to meet the 2014 Global Force Management Allocation Plan. And we will restore critical base operations and renovation projects. Although we intend to meet our most critical operational commitments to the combatant commanders, sequestration leaves us about $4.1 billion in operations and maintenance short and $6 billion in investment short in this year. This will result in our surge capacity of fully mission-capable carrier strike groups and amphibious-ready groups being reduced by about 2/3 through 2014. Further, we will have deferred about $1.2 billion in facility maintenance as well as depot-level maintenance for 84 aircraft and 184 engines. All combined, our operations and maintenance and our investment shortfalls will leave us about a $9 billion carryover challenge into FY14. A continuation of sequestration in 2014 will compound this carryover challenge from $9 billion to $23 billion. Further, accounts and activities we were able to protect in 2013, such as manpower, nuclear maintenance, and critical fleet operations, will be liable to reduction in 2014. Our people have remained resilient in the face of this uncertainty, and frankly, Chairman, I've been amazed throughout this process with the patience, the dedication of our sailors and our civilians. Our 2014 budget submission supports the Defense Strategic Guidance. It enables us to maintain our commitments in the Middle East and rebalance to the Asia-Pacific region. We prepared our 2014 budget with the following priorities: deliver overseas presence in accordance with the Global Force Management Allocation Plan, continue near-term investments to address challenges in the Middle East and Asia-Pacific, and develop long-term capabilities at the appropriate capacity to address warfighting challenges in the Middle East and Asia-Pacific. Our budget submission continues to invest in the future fleet. We've requested $44 billion in ships, submarines, manned and unmanned aircraft, weapons, cyber, and other procurement programs like the Joint Strike Fighter, Littoral Combat Ship, unmanned aerial vehicles, the DDG-1000, and the P-8, just to name a few. These investments will deliver a fleet of 300 ships by 2019 with greater interoperability and flexibility when compared to today's fleet. We continue to fund important capabilities such as a laser weapon system for small boat and drone defense, which we will deploy aboard the ship Ponce in the spring of 2014. Also in 2014, we will deploy on the carrier George Herbert Walker Bush a successfully tested prototype system to detect and defeat advanced wake-homing torpedoes. We continue to grow manpower by about 4,600 sailors net compared to our plan in last year's budget. These new sailors will reduce our manning gaps at sea, enhance the Navy's cyber capabilities, and improve our waterfront training. We will continue to address critical readiness and safety degraders such as sexual assault, suicide, operational tempo increases, and at-sea manning. Mr. Chairman, this budget places our Navy on a course which enables us to meet the requirements of the Defense Strategic Guidance today while building a relevant future force and sustaining our manpower for tomorrow. We appreciate everything you and this committee do for the sailors and civilians of our Navy, as well as their families. And we again ask for your support in removing the burden of sequestration so that we may better train, equip, and deploy these brave men and women in defense of our nation. I thank you.
Thank you, Admiral, for your testimony. General Amos, good morning.
Chairman, good morning. Ranking Member Visklowski, members of the committee, I'm pleased to appear before you today to talk about the 2013 posture of your United States Marine Corps. I'm equally grateful to this committee for what you did last February as you stood forward in support of the Department of Defense. Clearly, H.R. 933 would not have passed had it not been for the dedication and faithfulness of this committee. So on behalf of my secretary and Admiral Greenett and our men and women of the Navy and the Marine Corps, thank you very much. For more than 237 years, your Corps has been a people-intense force. We've always known that our greatest asset is the individual Marine. That has not changed during 12 years of hard combat. Our unique role as America's premier crisis response force is grounded in the legendary character and warfighting ethos of our people. Today's Marines are ethical warriors, forged by challenging training and made wise through decades of combat. You can take pride in knowing that as we gather here this morning in this hearing room, some 30,000 Marines are forward deployed around the world, promoting peace, protecting our nation's interests, and securing its defense. Sergeant Major Barrett and I recently returned from Afghanistan and can attest to the progress there. Marines have given the Afghan people a vision of success and the possibility of a secure and prosperous society. The people of the Helmand Province have a strong sense of optimism about their future. Afghan security forces have led the way now in every operation. Our commanders and their Marines now tell me that their Afghan partners overmatch the Taliban in every way and in every single engagement. Focusing a bit more tightly on the reality of today's security environment, it's clear to me the intrinsic value of forward naval presence. With declining resources to address the world's security challenges, forward deployed sea-based naval forces are affordable and just make sense. They proactively support our nation's security strategy by shaping and deterring and rapidly responding to multiple crises, all while treading very lightly on our allies and our partners' sovereign territory. Amphibious forces are a sensible and unmistakable solution in preserving our national security. Naval forces, and the Marine Corps in particular, are our nation's insurance policy, a hedge against uncertainty in an unpredictable world. A balanced air-ground logistics team, we respond in hours and days, not weeks and months. This is our raison d'etre. This is what we do. This year's budget baseline submission of $24.2 billion was framed by our following service level priorities. First, we will continue to provide the best trained and equipped Marines to Afghanistan. Second, we will protect the readiness of our forward deployed rotational forces. Third, we will reset and reconstitute our operating forces as our Marines and equipment return from nearly 12 years of combat. Fourth, as much as is humanly possible, we will modernize our force through investing in the individual Marine first and by replacing aging combat systems next. And lastly, as ever, we will keep faith with our Marines, our sailors, and our families. We've remained committed to these priorities in FY13 despite significant reductions in our facilities sustainment and home station unit training accounts due to the loss of $775 million in operations and maintenance funding from sequestration. To maintain readiness in those units that are deployed and those that are next to deploy, I have paid the bill with infrastructure and sustainment monies. I've accepted a level of risk in FY13 to ensure the Corps' deployability and relevance in the uncertain times we currently live in. But sequestration in FY14 and beyond will drive me to reduced levels of readiness that I cannot responsibly accept. To pay my bills, I will begin major force structure reshaping efforts next year within America's 911 force. Reshaping efforts that will directly affect our ability and capacity to respond to emerging crises around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, your Marine Corps is aware of the fiscal realities confronting our nation. During these times of constrained resources, we will be responsible stewards of scarce public funds. We will continue to prioritize and make the hard decisions before coming to Congress. I'm acutely aware that our success as Marines is directly linked to the unwavering support of Congress and the American people. It has always been that way. Once again, I thank the committee for your continued support, and I'm prepared to answer your questions.
Thank you, General. We've got a high level of interest this morning. Thank everybody, all the members, for being here on time. We want to have as many rounds of questions as possible, so I'm going to yield my time to Ms. Granger.
Thank you, and thank you. Secretary Mavis, General. Oh, yep. General Amos and Admiral Greener, thank you for your service and thank you for being here. I have one question only, and that's for General Amos. You've been a really unwavering supporter of the F-35 and helped keep us on target to make that happen because you repeatedly said how important it is to the Marines. So I'd like you to tell us how the training of F-35B is going at Eglin for the Marine Corps.
Congresswoman, thanks for the opportunity. In fact, I was down there on Saturday. I was down at a memorial service for our explosive ordnance disposal. Admiral Greener and I were there, and I took the time to go over to the training squadron at Eglin Air Force Base, BMFAT 501. 13 F-35s, 2 of them belong to the United Kingdom. We are partnered with them, and they are outpacing their training, their planned training. They're ahead of schedule. They have completely trained 2 pilots, completely through the syllabus. It's exciting times down there. We've stood up our first squadron, our first what we call fleet squadron out in Yuma, Arizona. It has 4 airplanes and has begun training out there. We'll get 2 more airplanes by the end of this month and 16 by the end of this year. So things are actually on track or ahead of schedule, Congresswoman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Ms. Granger, thank you. Mr. Moran.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Several issues, but let me focus on one because it's particularly current. I was just shown an article that came out this morning in Bloomberg, information that was classified, but I guess now that it's out in the press, we can talk about it publicly. It's with regard to the LCS, and it addresses some of the issues that some of us have raised in the past. This was the Perez report. A Navy spokeswoman said that it identified areas where the program needed improvement and further development. Of course, construction costs have doubled, exactly doubled, from $220 to $440 million per ship. But to quote some of the report, the Navy did acknowledge that the vessels are being built to the service's lowest level of survivability. Now, some of the quotes are, the ship is not expected to be survivable, and that it is not expected to maintain mission capability after taking a significant hit in a hostile combat environment. Even in its surface warfare role, when all armaments are working as intended, the vessel is only capable of neutralizing small, fast attack boats, and it remains vulnerable to ships with anti-ship cruise missiles that can travel more than 8 kilometers or 5 miles, according to this report. Now, Iran has 67 such vessels, according to a chart in the report. So it's not going to do us much good in a situation like that. The LCS, again in quotes, is ill-suited for combat operations against anything but small, fast boats not armed with anti-ship missiles. And the vessel's beam or widest width may be a navigational challenge in narrow waterways and tight harbors. I could go through a lot more of the critical observations, but the bottom line is what we have, this subcommittee has expressed concern about in the past. A combat ship that doesn't survive in combat is only marginally useful. And we're now in a context of sequestration. We're furloughing folks, we're cutting back on programs. So I do think we need to address the appropriateness of putting as much money as we plan to, 55 ships, I guess it's now down to 52. 2 different variants, we've questioned that. I think we ought to get on the record an explanation of why we continue to move forward in the manner that we do. Mr. Secretary, I think you'd probably be the best one to respond to this.
Congressman, I appreciate the chance to talk about LCS, and I'm going to talk about the program, and I'm going to ask Admiral Greener to talk about the combat capabilities of this ship. This has become one of our best performing programs. It It was certainly did not start that way, but by having the two variants compete against each other based mainly on price, prices came down dramatically. And while the first of each variant's 10-ship buy will cost $439 million, the last ship of that buy will cost $350 million. So the price is coming down fairly dramatically, or actually dramatically. When Congress was briefed in the early part of the last decade about the cost of this ship, it was estimated that it would be $220 million, as you pointed out, without with a commercial hull, without a combat hull. We've changed that, but it was also seen that the weapon systems would be far more costly. These ships are coming in, if you count the weapon systems, at almost exactly the total price that Congress was briefed on more than a decade ago. We have two great shipbuilders building these, Austal in Mobile, Alabama, Marionette in Wisconsin, and the ships are coming out now under budget and on time. The ship itself, which has the modular construction so that you can drop one weapon system in and take another one out, thereby not making it a single mission ship and not having to build a new ship when technology changes. These weapon systems, the anti-surface, anti-submarine, anti-mine warfare, are in development now. All are in the water, all are associated with ships, and they are in a spiral development, so as technology improves, so will those weapon systems.
Mr. Secretary, if I could-
let me just jump in here. I think Mr. Moran's focusing, obviously, cost but vulnerability, and I do want to make sure that we have
I'm
two
sorry.
rounds of
Okay.
questions here. So, Admiral, if you can briefly address the issue of vulnerability, and then we're going to move on to Mr. Crenshaw.
The ship is designed what we call level 3. There's a level of, if you will, survivability. And we said level 3. And what that means is you take a hit. If ship takes a hit, it is able to survive, and then it returns to base. It doesn't stay and fight. And it depends on what the mission of the ship is and what you're willing to pay for that. It is designed, and it has met the standards of that level. So if the criticism is that we made the decision on level 3 as opposed to 2 or 1, then that's a criticism. But it is built to those design standards. It is testing appropriately so. I could paint you a picture, Congressman, really, my goodness, where you drive a ship into a certain scenario and it's vulnerable to being overwhelmed by cruise missiles. All of our ships, even the very best, which are quite capable. We don't send ships out alone as sole platforms to do it all. We do this in packages. We are up, if you will, improving the armament on the ship, and we will continue to do so. Lastly, we assign, the study is over a year old, the one that was published. We've done a lot since then. We've had a Littoral Combat Ship Council, and we've had the ship inspected by our INSERV, which is our very objective. We're taking a lot of actions, and I'd be happy to talk to you in more detail offline if you want.
Okay, Mr. Rand, I want to get a couple of rounds of questions in here. I think you've...
I didn't want to answer it. I didn't want to ask a question, but I wanted to make a quick response to a point that was made, just for the record.
If you'd make a quick response, and then we're going to go to Mr. Crenshaw.
Because in the report, it says that the war game demonstrated that getting all the right people and equipment on station to conduct the exchange of personnel and equipment could take several weeks, and that process removed LCS from the tactical fight. So the point that was made, I think, is subject to some question, but thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Crenshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Particularly Admiral Grunert, you were in my district last week, and I appreciate that was well received. But I think the committee members should know that when I got up to speak, the lights went out and the mic went off. So
it could happen today, too.
The sequester evidently it had an impact in that area. But before I ask two quick questions, I want to ask Secretary Mavis just to clarify the issue of strategic dispersal, because after Secretary Hagel was here, I think it got a little fuzzy, but I don't want to rehash the whole history. You know that before we had an all-nuclear carrier force, that we had 2 home ports on the East Coast and we had 3 on the West Coast. Now we have all nuclear, and we only have 1 on the East Coast. And there's been some study, and the Quadrennial Defense Review said we ought to have 2 home ports on the East Coast. We have 3 on the West. So just clarify for me in the subcommittee that what's the Navy's current policy on strategic dispersal of nuclear aircraft carriers?
Congressman, the Navy continues to support strategic dispersal of our carriers and of all of our ships. Last year, purely as a budget decision, we deferred the movement of 1 carrier and its strike group, but it was not canceled. It was merely deferred.
Well, thank you, sir. And a question to Admiral Grenard. We talked a lot about ships, and at one time we want to have 313. There was a time we want to have 600, and I hear you talk about those that are under contract. And I guess my question is, if it seems like we still need ships, and we ask you to do a lot of things, chase pirates off the coast of Somalia, to interdict drug runners in the Caribbean, ferry humanitarian aid to Haiti, and send destroyers to the Mediterranean, all those things. But I guess I have to wonder, when the decision was made to decommission 7 cruisers that seemed not to be obsolete and still had some life left in them, I think it was this committee, as well as the other committee in the House and the 2 committees in the Senate, said, we think it'd be better not to make a short-term budget-driven decision, but to actually modernize those ships and keep them a little bit longer. And so we put some money for modernization. But I think the plan now is to still decommission those in 2015. If that is the case, if I were to ask you, do you think we need less ships, you'd probably say no. So why are we still planning on decommissioning those cruisers?
We don't need less ships, so I'll go on the record with that, Congressman. You're right there. The issue is strictly budget-driven. In 13, we described Budget Control Act compelled us to do what we did in the fiscal year 13 submission. You're right, this committee did provide the funds for 13 and 14 for those ships. And our situation in 15, as I mentioned, I have carryover from the sequestration in 13 into 14. 14 is uncertain. 15 is even more uncertain. So it's very difficult. We're in no better shape in 15 than we were in 13, sir, strictly budgetarily speaking. And so I can't predict that. Lastly, I would say when we submitted our 14 budget from the Navy, it was before Public Law 113-6 came in, which gave or provided those funds. And so we were kind of crossing, if you will, in the night. We were out of sync in that regard. So we couldn't even consider it in that regard.
Are there any plans to reprioritize? I mean, that's what we did, I think, in terms of our appropriation process, to try to find some money. Is that something y'all are thinking about, or is that just kind of out the window in terms of 15?
I assure you, Congressman, I'm always thinking of ways to, to retain and sustain force structure as a balance. As stated before, 306 is my goal. The soonest I can get there, and balancing our ship to you, we got a lot of things to do. Always under consideration, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to first thank all of you for being here today, and I'm going to ask you to expand on the pervasive issue of sexual assault within our military ranks. According to your department's own numbers, an estimated 19,000 sexual assaults occurred in 2011 alone. Of the estimated 19,000 instances, only 3,193 sexual assaults were reported, and far fewer went to trial. As you're aware, the news broke yesterday that firmly demonstrates how pervasive sexual assault is. Just this past weekend, one of the chiefs of the Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office was arrested for none other than a sexual assault. He was in the Air Force, but you would think this person would have been vetted, that there would have been due consideration to have had a top-notch person put in that office. So it's pretty unbelievable to women all across this country, and I'm sure to the men and women who wear the uniform, who are living up to the high standards and high codes that you expect your servicemen and women to live up to. But we absolutely need to do more about this. And recently I had written a letter to the chairman of this committee where I was hopeful that we would be having a briefing or a hearing on sexual assault in the military and what we can do to help you with this. Now, I noticed in your testimony you addressed it. The highlights of the Department of Navy 2014 budget, please. I prepared to be corrected. Didn't see it in here at all. So I'm glad you addressed it in your testimony, but I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little more on what you're doing, and I don't mean the videos that you're showing the recruits, what you're really doing to prosecute, hold people accountable, and to...
Congresswoman, I would be very happy to do that, and I ask my colleagues to do it as well. I've been asked if I'm concerned about this, and my answer is no, I'm angry about this. I think you're absolutely right. This is an attack on the men and women in our military. It is a crime. It is, if somebody was walking around taking random shots at people, we would figure out a way to fix it. And I think that we've taken a lot of actions, and I think we're making progress. First, I'm the only service that has a sexual assault prevention office that reports to me, and their budget is under my budget. And I apologize for it not being broken out, but they have a strong budget there. Second, I think we're beginning to learn what works in the fleet. For example, we took a hard look at our recruit training at boot camp. We found that there were relatively few issues there, but where the issues came were at the school right after that, at A school, that came right after boot camp. So we've become far more intrusive there with things like shore patrol, things like working with local hotels to make sure that if parties are going on, that we know what's going on about it. Things like bystander intervention, to make sure that sailors and Marines know that these are shipmates that are being attacked and they have a responsibility to intervene. We are rolling those things out across the fleet. The Commandant and his Sergeant Major has gone worldwide talking to Marines and stressing the importance of this. The CNO has done likewise. We cannot afford, we cannot be a great military force as long as we have attacks like this occurring inside the military. And we are working, I hope, in the right direction. And I think that at least some of the early feedback we're getting from some of the actions we're taking are positive, but as long as there's a single sexual assault, it's too many.
Congresswoman, thank you for asking that question. It's an issue, it's a problem, it's a crime. And in my service alone, in fiscal year, actually calendar year 2011, we had 334 sexual assaults, both restricted and unrestricted combined. As you imply or talk about in that report, the numbers are 4 to 5 times higher than that. That's the reality of it. So the issue is, in my service, we've got 14,020 females as of this morning in the United States Marine Corps, 7% of our population. So if I took that 334 and you just multiplied it times 4 or 5, the numbers are up there at 12,000 or so. And you start taking, 1,200 or so, and you start looking at the population and you realize that the stark reality is it could be 10% of my female population is being sexually assaulted. And from a variety of different things, from everything from just touching to saying bad things to something really heinous happening. Ma'am, it's a crime. And I tell you, we started last summer under the Secretary's actual guidance and motivation. We started last summer to change our culture. We, as the Secretary talked about, Sergeant Major and I traveled around the world, 27 different presentations to every officer and staff NCO in the Marine Corps saying, we've got to stop it. I brought every general officer in for 2 days this last summer, all the sergeants majors in. So we've started a campaign plan. It really began in earnest probably around September. So we are just into phase 2. Phase 1 was a complete reorganization of our legal community. We have doubled. I just got the statistics, and it's part of the report that Congress will get either yesterday or today. We've doubled the amount of convictions, the amount of prosecutions, and the amount of convictions just in the last 12 months. So we're heading that direction. I'm determined to change our culture, and I apologize to this committee for the shameful behavior of my Marines.
Admiral, would you respond as well, too? And then I'm going
Sir.
to move to Mr. Calvert.
Ma'am, I would characterize it as a safety problem and a readiness problem in the Navy. I, like the Secretary, am angry about it, but more importantly, I think we're focused and have some tangible things in place. You're right. We can't train our way out of this, but in order to change a culture, you got to make sure that our people are aware of the problem. So we've done some very good actions, I think, on training them. Okay, they're trained. Next, we've got to get the reports right so we understand the problem. Where is this happening? How is this happening? What are the demographics of it? So that when we get away from the stigma of not reporting, so that we can now go to those places. And what I mean by that is we've had some success in the Great Lakes area. That's where our recruit training is in our A schools. Those are our initial schools. Through efforts done by leadership there, we've reduced the reports of sexual. The reports of sexual assaults have reduced by over 2/3, 66% over 2 years. What are they doing right? We've took those best practices and recently applied them to San Diego. And it involves getting businesses involved, getting leadership involved, the Shore Patrol now going and look at on-base, off-base, where people gather, and get away from the occasion where things are going in the wrong direction based on what we know about the previous events. We've talked with the mayor in San Diego, with the businesses. They're very much on board, like they were in the Chicago area in Great Lakes. And we're starting to see some changes there. I'm not declaring victory in San Diego. I'm just saying we're starting to see some tangible reductions there. Next, we're going to do the same thing in Japan and also in Naples, going to the places where we're finding these things are occurring. Lastly, I'd say, again, with regard to prosecution, we've worked with NCIS and have reduced the time to do adjudication from 300 days in many cases down to about 80 days on average cases over the last 6 months. So it's coordination with the law and with the if you will, the officials in that regard. And it's taking care of the victims. We've increased by 66 numbers, and that was our goal, to get sexual assault victim advocates as well as counselors. So it's a series of things going on, ma'am, but it's looking for what is the tangible means so we can measure it and understand where to go from here and adjust.
Thank you, and I hope that the committee does do a briefing or hearing on this because we need to help them. They're trying to do the right thing, but it is a stain on anyone who wears a uniform when another person's assaulted, and I want to lift that stain away from all the men and women who serve in our military.
Thank you, Ms. McCollum. This is a very important issue. Mr. Calvert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I hope that the Navy and the Marine Corps does a better job in vetting their people than sexual assault in the United States Air Force. I guess this weekend, the Air Force Chief of Sexual Assault Prevention, Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Korsinski, was arrested for sexual assault. That doesn't look good to our United States military. One comment that was made about our ship vulnerability, Admiral, and all ships are vulnerable, like you say. And one thing that I know you've been putting in a lot of investment, you said in your testimony, is defensive mechanisms, whether they're laser or other mechanisms against this wave runner type torpedo or missile, which really is very frightening, even to your carrier groups. These defensive mechanisms have a lot of promise to them, that you believe that these ships can be protected by these mechanisms?
I believe so, sir. We have compelling evidence. That is, we've done a number of runs that the laser works with regard to that. That's why we're going to take it out to the Gulf for two reasons. Put it in situ and see how does it perform in the heat and waves and all that. And it's also a quick turnaround. So
Now, is this the laser or the rail gun?
this is the laser.
Laser.
The rail gun is a electromagnetic giant capacitor that generates energy that flings a large, if you will, hunk of metal, a projectile, great distances at huge, huge energy. And so when it hits, it makes it makes an explosion like, but it isn't an explosive. So you don't have to go through all the care and feeding that goes on with putting explosives and having ammo bunkers. You're just having large chunks of metal, if you will, on board. Quite simple. But yeah, anyway, to answer your question, yes, sir. I would feel much better, and the help of this committee, by the way, putting better guns on our patrol craft over there, better guns on our carriers, better guns on our destroyers and cruisers over there that counter small craft. We have better ISR. You detect them coming, you can prepare yourself accordingly. But I think this laser technology has great promise. That's why we're going to put it out there and check it out.
Okay. Mr. Secretary, one thing, we discussed this. Is there one, and that's not just the Navy, but is there any major procurement program that you know of that's on budget and on schedule?
Yes, there are. The
Just
Virginia
to make
class
us all feel
submarine, the
good.
DDG 51, LCS.
LCS is on isn't
Yes,
the
it is.
price on that has gone up significantly in the last number of
The
years.
price on that has actually come down by more than 40% from the first 4 ships that were built. We are, as I said to Congressman Moran,
But the initial cost on those ships, those original 4, aren't they substantially higher than they thought they were going to cost?
I'm sorry.
Wasn't the original 4 LCS ships substantially more expensive than what we thought they were going to be?
Absolutely, and it was a program that was
They're bringing them down 40%. That's getting them back to just a little bit more than what we thought that was going to be. I mean,
You're absolutely right.
but isn't that part of the...
When the LCS program, when I got there, it was, and this is a technical term, a mess. The prices were out of control, and that's why I made the decision to make the 2 variants compete against each other, based mainly on price. And prices came down. Prices came down dramatically by 40% from the first 4 ships. But prices continue to come down. We have a 10-ship block buy from each manufacturer. The first ship of the class will cost $439 million. The last ship of each one will cost $350 million. Each one of the same ship is costing less, which is the way procurement programs should operate.
Well, I would hope so, because it seems, from my perspective, I think from the committee's perspective, that most of these procurements aren't on time or on budget. The submarine program was brought up in the earlier part of the hearing. And back in the old days, you had one individual, I don't know if that's the right answer, one individual that was responsible for the submarine program, and it seemed to work. And he took the responsibility. And it seems that these program managers in the military, and again, it's not just the Navy, but just kind of come and go, and nobody takes responsibility. And the F-35, for instance, how many program managers we've had in the F-35 program since its inception? I don't think we could count them. 4 or so, at least.
If you could briefly reply, then we're gonna move on to Mr. Owens.
But anyway, that's I think we just need a lot of work on the procurement system that we have in the United States military to build these weapon systems approximating the original estimates.
Congressman, I agree with you absolutely, and I'm proud of where we are in the Navy now on that. And one thing on the Virginia-class submarine, the last one that we commissioned, the well-named USS Mississippi, came in a year early and $170 million under budget.
Okay, thank you,
Mr. Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for coming in to testify today. To follow on some of Mr. Calvert's questions. As we move forward in the environment we're currently in, have you prioritized in your budget those programs that you feel are absolutely essential, particularly in light of rebalancing into the Pacific? And how have you gone through that prioritization in terms of how you will refocus assets in the Pacific and also how you will acquire new assets?
Well, we're going to rebalance the Pacific in 4 ways. One is the force structure movement, and the chartlet in front of you describes that. If you flip it over and you look at 14, 18, 20, you'll see how we are operating forward and moving our ships out to the Asia Pacific. So it's force structure, and that's aircraft and ships. Number 2, capability. We sat down and benchmarked the challenges in the Western Pacific toward ASW, electronic warfare, electronic attack, strike, and cyber, and said that is the theater we benchmark against, and we've invested in capabilities to that benchmark. 3, we also have migrated, if you will, home ports toward the Western Pacific, so that by the end of this decade, we'll have 60% of our ships in the west and 40% in the east, home ported. And lastly, it's in intellectual capacity, improving and increasing the complexity of exercises in the Western Pacific. May not be generating a whole bunch more, but those that we do with India, with Indonesia, with Japan, Korea, and all of our partners out there, much more comprehensive and complex. It's all of that brought together makes up the rebalance, Congressman.
Thank you. General?
Congressman, we are all in with regards to rebalance the Pacific, but to a larger degree, to answer your question right up front, we have gone through now as a result of sequestration and prioritized everything from the training we get for sexual assault, suicide prevention, family readiness, operations and maintenance, forward deployed forces getting ready, training and preparation for deploying. And then we've racked and stacked those, so it's almost an inverted pyramid kind of thing, where we've got a lot of things up at the top of this thing that we're going to divest ourselves of as we work our way down towards the more important things. The things that we're protecting are the reorientation of our forces in the Pacific. We've just put our 3rd Infantry Battalion in the Pacific, and whereas we had 1 in there a year and a half ago, we've just put our force back on the ground in Darwin, Australia. We're training in Guam, we're training in the Philippines, so we're committed to the reorientation in the Pacific to support the President's strategy. So that's all prioritization for us. There are things that are going to fall off over the next year, but we have a list and we're just going down those things and we're saying, okay, that's not nearly as important. I'll give you an example. There were some things that we were going to buy new in the way of ground equipment. We simply can't afford to do that. We've asked ourselves the question, what is good enough? So are 7-ton trucks that we've been driving for the last 7 or 8 years in Afghanistan good enough? Yes. We've got 23,000 Humvees. We weren't going to keep those Humvees. Well, we're going to recapitalize probably 14 to 15,000 of them, send them back to the depots, and they will be good enough over the next 7 or 8 years. So the answer to your question is we are absolutely prioritizing, and we're committed to the Pacific.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to talk about joint high-speed vessel, but since my friend from Virginia mentioned LCS, I want to invite him and everyone on the subcommittee down to Mobile, where one of these 2 ships are being built. And I would challenge you, if you've not seen it, then you would be better informed about this issue. And it is important. And I say that with all due respect, because he is a friend. And I think we ought to go to Wisconsin and Mississippi and Virginia and other places where our military vessels are being built. I think that's something that we haven't done enough of, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, to see boots on the ground of the industrial base that we oftentimes talk about. I don't think there's been a secretary in my 30 years of working here as a staffer to someone who served as a subcommittee chairman of 2 different subcommittees on this Appropriations Committee, or as a member of this subcommittee itself. I've never seen a service chief who's been more hands-on, more innovative, more thoughtful of thinking outside of the box, and who has addressed some of the concerns that initially were raised about LCS, than the former governor of Mississippi. It was not lost on me, the name of that ship, Mr. Secretary, being your next-door neighbor. But I want to give the Admiral a chance to respond to Mr. Moran's question about the war games scenario. And I want to follow up on what my good friend Mr. Calvert raised as well. You know, I talked with the Bloomberg reporter. He didn't even come to Mobile. And I don't think you really can assess the aluminum hull variant, whether it's survivability or whatever, if you're not going to come out and kick the tires, so to speak.
For the record, I never talked to him.
Well, no, but I talked to him for over an hour. And Forbes, another respected news source, came out with a separate analysis of LCS just a couple days ago, which talks about the innovative new measures that LCS makes available. So in the remaining time of my question, I'll ask both the Secretary and the Admiral.
You put on a pretty good defense, I must say. We know there's a question in there.
Well, the question is this. The world's a different place. One of your predecessors was in Mobile a few days ago who was involved in trying to get to a 600-ship Navy. We're not going to be there. We'll hope to get up to 300 ships. But you've said publicly before, Mr. Secretary, that this is part of the Navy for the future. Those are my words, not yours. You were much more eloquent. Tell us a little bit in the remaining time that I leave you about how you envision this, because I can only imagine that in the shallow waters off the coast of Africa or in off Indonesia or the Philippines, that this ship and others like it, like Joint High-Speed Vessel, can play a major role in the Navy of the future.
Thank you, Congressman, and I'm tempted to just yield my time to you.
That's not permitted, actually. We're going to keep rolling here. All hands on deck. Just mind the clock. We want to get a couple of rounds in here.
You're right. This is one of the crucial platforms for us for the future. In fact, LCS-1, the Freedom, arrived in Singapore a few days ago. Both the CNO and I are going out to meet her in Singapore, and we're planning to deploy 4 LCSs by 2016 to Singapore. The Straits of Malacca, all the waters around there, it's a perfect ship to operate in that environment and also with the navies in that region. The same thing goes for the Arabian Gulf. And one of the things about survivability that the CNO pointed out is that we don't send these ships out by themselves in hostile environments. They're part of a strike team. They each have their own unique missions, but the capabilities that LCS, both variants, bring is crucial and will be an important part of the Navy stretching far into the future.
Thank you, Mr. Bonner. I know you're shy and retiring, and you've made your point. Well taken. Ms. Capter.
Mr. Chairman, please make sure that the record notes retiring is an adjective used to describe.
Absolutely.
I don't want to get any rumors out.
I don't want to be visited by Sonny Callahan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Captain.
Chairman. Thank you all for your great service to our country. I have several questions. I'll try to be brief. First of all, General Amos, on page 24 of your testimony, you talk about resiliency and some of the challenges to that and what you are doing inside the Marine Corps to help those who have suffered war-related injuries, including TBI and PTS. I wanted to encourage you to include any assistance you could to Ohio-based Lima Company in Brook Park, Ohio. That sustained, there were 46 Marines, I believe, who were killed in Iraq in Al Anbar province, 2 Navy corpsmen, and then more recently 1 in Afghanistan, to make sure that that unit is attended to, and all of their, all the survivors in that unit, they sustained enormous losses. And we thank the Corps and we thank their families for their great sacrifice for our country. And Ohio remembers that, and we feel it very deeply. I wanted to associate myself with the remarks of Congresswoman McCullum on the sexual assault issue and just comment that I agree with her on the need for a special hearing on that. But I also would encourage you, and I'm sure you're doing this already, with the volunteer military, statistics are showing us that a larger number, quite a substantial number of people who are coming into all of our services have experienced violent behavior in their own homes and families prior to enlistment. And I think there are probably ways of checking on sexual assault even in the homes as you look to enlist. And I think there's a lot that can be done prior to service. And so I would just ask you to focus there. I'm sure you already are, but I wanted to add my words of concern and support there. Secretary Mabus, I think you're a great Secretary of the Navy. I read with interest the article that was in yesterday's paper, USA Today. I hope I brought it with me. Ah, yes, here it is. I don't know how many of our colleagues got to see this, about a military that could be more powerful by focusing on energy independence. I can honestly say your branch of the military has had more aggressive interest in this than some of the others I had expected more of. I want to compliment you on that. I want to thank you for being focused on the future, not the past. And some of the inventions I see coming out of the Navy, I honestly, I would have lost money had I bet on Navy being the branch that would be taking such an aggressive lead, even though Navy is in our family. But I am just so impressed with what you're trying to do in terms of living in the future and getting us into military partnerships with people who share our political values, rather than living this paradox of partnerships with undemocratic places just because we need their fuel. So I encourage you on in those efforts. All of the research that's being done through the Navy, any deployment to the civilian sector, you have a supporter here. I will help you in any way that I can as 1/535th of this institution in terms of energy independence. But it's mentioned early in your testimony, Mr. Secretary, General Amos, you talk about it in your testimony, and the people that I represent, thank you so very much. I wanted also to ask a little bit of a different question relating to nuclear weapons, and that is any comments you may have, any one of you, on our the nuclear weapons that we have, their suitability and capability as we move into this century to meet the needs of today and tomorrow, and knowing everything you know about the weapons that you have carried. If you had to trim some aspect of the nuclear weapons program, where would you look?
Well, ma'am, I'll comment first. We have to be sure that the weapons that we have and the supporting systems are modernized first. The stockpiles, the weapons themselves, and as I get the systems that employ. And it's really about the confidence that if we're going to deliver one, we can deliver it where it needs to go and be accurate. Once we have that, then there's this sense that a feeling of confidence of what we have. You don't have to have as many because you don't have to deliver as many, if you will, because you're not sure they're going to go precisely where you may want them to go. That would be step one in my view. And there is a program underway to do exactly that. The D5, which is our missile of today, has got an extension program and an upgrade program. All of our submarines, which I can speak to, have upgrades in their systems to be sure, once again, that they perform far to the right, that would be better, in their requirements and system. So that is, to me, the most important part, modernization and upgrade.
I thank you very much. Is my time expired?
It
Mr.
has.
Chairman? Could
But
I just say 5 seconds?
You and I serve on energy and water, and you and I will make sure that the nuclear stockpile we have is reliable.
Yes, that's why I asked the question. That's why I asked. I just wanted to say, Mr. Chairman, also, if I might, that in terms of the drug trade, for the record, I would be very interested in the Navy's observations about Afghanistan and what has happened with the increased production of plants for heroin and what is happening on the drug side as we try to rotate out of there. There's no more significant problem that my region faces in terms of crime up in the northern part of our country than drugs. Now, they don't necessarily come from Afghanistan, but I would be very interested in how you see that
For the
problem,
record,
I
we'll
think.
take that question. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for your service. I have to tell you, I'm still reeling from my friend from Alabama's fervent defense of LCS. And just for the record, if they're as tough as the Crimson Tide front four, if you can assure me of that, then that'll be good enough. Roll Tide. Okay, Roll Tide. I've got actually a little bit more of an operational question to ask you, gentlemen, and you may not be able to fully discuss it, but parts of it you will be. One of the things that I was not in favor of what we did in Libya, but I was so impressed by the manner in which we did it and how quickly, particularly the Navy, was able to put assets at the disposal of the president that just did an extraordinary job, you know, on the fly, and with us deeply engaged in other parts of the world. We're at a really unusual and difficult situation, I think, for all of us right now. We've got an unfolding crisis in Syria that the president may or may not have to do something with. We've got a continuing challenge of the nuclear capability efforts in Iran, and we've had a lot of saber rattling in North Korea. And obviously, your two services, particularly, Mr. Secretary, your responsibility, the Navy and the Marine Corps, will be heavily engaged in all three of those things. So I'm curious, are you comfortable that you have the resources and we have the capabilities to give the President the options that he would need if something that none of us wants to happen happened in any of those areas, let alone in, you know, they could actually converge in some ways, and you could be dealing with more than one at a time.
Congressman, to answer your question directly, I'm absolutely comfortable that we have the assets that we would need, and that is the Navy and Marine Corps' job, is to give the President options. And you pointed out Libya. I think you're on the fly. You said we sent a big deck amphib there, which provided the air cover. We didn't have to send a carrier. We had one of our amphibs. We also had a submarine firing Tomahawk missiles, and we had a destroyer firing Tomahawk missiles. So we have multi-mission, very flexible platforms that can do a lot of different things depending on the mission. And so I am comfortable. And as long as this committee has been very, very helpful in terms of providing that, and the ships and the platforms, the weapon systems that we're buying for the future, I think will meet the needs that will come up in the future.
In summary, Mr. Cole, I think I said we got to be where it matters, when it matters, and I bring your attention to the chartlet I provided. As we proceed through this decade, we will be out and about in more places, but what's most important are the places, the Bahrain, the Rhoda, the Sigonella, all those, you know, that we operated from to be able to do. To the Japan, if it wasn't for the forward deployed naval force, we couldn't be on station in a matter of a couple of days providing the missile shield that was necessary during that period of heightened tension. And so ships matter. Numbers matter, no question. Ships forward matter most, in my view. I'm very comfortable that we can do the offshore option, and where you see Navy on this, think Marine Corps as well.
Well,
that's our partner.
And thank you very much for making the point about how important the staging areas that our allies provide us are, because I get quite a few questions at home, why are we over there doing this? And always try to say, provides us capability that we want to have. This is not just a favor we do for our friends, it's also, you know, very important for ourselves. One other quick question, and I'll yield back my time, and probably directed at you, Secretary, but maybe also at you too, General Amos. We've clearly, and you touched on some of this in your testimony, got a tremendous challenge in resetting the forces. We're out of Iraq and we're drawing down in Afghanistan, and we've done a lot of that, frankly, as a committee on the fly through OCO over the years, and that's beginning to come down pretty dramatically too. So one, are you going to have the resources to do the things that you knew, and how concerned are you that perhaps when we should have, we didn't put all the things in the regular budget that we should have. We sort of were funding them on a not reliable basis and not something that you can easily count on going forward.
The Navy and Marine Corps have been pretty aggressive in moving money from OCO back to base for some of the reasons you just mentioned. We clearly need some OCO sustainment for not only the Marine Corps coming out of the Second Ground War in Afghanistan, but also the Navy for the support we give from the sea. We use OCO, for example, for about 20% of the maintenance of our ships, simply because of the increased operational tempo. We reset in stride, the Navy does. The Marine Corps, I believe the number is a little over $3 billion, $3.2 billion that the Marine Corps will need to reset the Marine Corps, the new Marine Corps, when it comes out, and we will need OCO for that, because that is clearly a wartime expenditure. Finally, I would say that as we draw down the Marine Corps to our new 182.1 size level, the way we do that and keep faith with Marines, not telling anybody to go home early, but bringing it down consistently and prudently requires some OCO funding as well, because that surge that went up to 202 was in direct result to the two wars.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Mr. Womack, thank you for your patience. I know you're almost on the tail end. We've got a few other members as well.
Call me forward deployed down here.
Formerly in the Sinai, right?
At this. I thank the gentlemen for their service. And you know, the Secretary was bragging on the USS Mississippi. It should be noted that in a previous life, you did serve on the USS Little Rock. So
I did, and I had the privilege of naming
Arkansas.
the new USS Little Rock.
That's correct. Mr. Chairman, I've just got one question. It's not my intent to provide a softball question for the benefit of the Commandant and the Chief. It is my intent to realistically portray and allow these two gentlemen an opportunity to maybe take us a little bit further down into the weeds on readiness. In General Amos, as I was reading your brochure that is in front of us, in that brochure you say that you create options and decision space for our nation's leaders. I have to believe that sequestration, indeed a enduring sequestration, will have an impact on those options and perhaps on that decision space. So take the time that you need and I'm going to give Admiral Greenert the same opportunity perhaps with transit times and other things meaningful to his force, but take the time that you need to help us out with what we are doing to affect the readiness of our Marine Corps.
Thank you, sir. You're absolutely correct. I alluded to it in my opening comments that we're paying for readiness for this year for all those forces that are currently forward deployed overseas in the Pacific, and we have a bunch of them. We have them on amphibious ships, we have them on carriers, and we certainly have our combat forces on the ground in Afghanistan. We are keeping those at the highest state of readiness, and we're moving operations maintenance money around within the Marine Corps, within my authorities, to be able to do that. We have the next tranche of units fixing to go to Afghanistan. The next one's fixing to go on our amphibious ships, and those that are fixing to go on carriers, and those that are going to deploy to the Pacific. We have moved money into those to ensure that they are at a high state of readiness, so that those forces are ready to provide options. When things happen bad, the President and the National Command Authority need to be able to say, okay, let me put this on pause for just a second and figure out what it is we have to do. It's not always exactly clear what the next step is. assisting them in doing that quite often is naval presence. A ship pulling off the shore, an amphibious rated group with 2,500 Marines, is a pretty formidable deterrent in anybody's mind. It'll catch people's attention and maybe quell a little bit of the anxiety and allow the National Command Authority to have that decision space. So ready forces forward deployed do that, Congressman. What's going to happen in sequestration, the way we're headed right now, and this is not, I'm not wringing my hands, it's fact, the sequestration is law. It came in on March the 2nd, and we are planning accordingly. And but our readiness next year for our non-deployed combat units, our battalions, our squadrons, will be below 50%. In other words, 50% of, it'll be what we call C3 and C4. C1 and C2 is what the readiness levels the combatant commanders want to deploy at, want our forces to come into their theater. We'll be at C3 or C4 for greater than 50% of those non-deploying units. In other words, the units that are still back home, whole cloth units, that are ready to go or should be ready to go at a moment's notice. So that is the reality of what's going to happen. We are not going to be able to maintain 182,000 Marines. We're on our way down there. It sounds good. You feel good when you say that number. But sequestration is simply not going to allow that to happen. We can't afford it. I mean, so we get into capacity now, to your question, to your point, Congressman. We will reach a point in the future where the capacity, the depth on the bench, it's not the B team, but it's the backup team that's fixing to go next, will not be ready. So for me to be able to maintain a level of readiness, I've got to get in there and adjust manpower, structure, equipment, investments, all that stuff, so that the force that I do have, in other words, whatever the Marine Corps is going to look like, is in fact a ready force. It will be a smaller force, and you'll have less capacity. I think this is, we're headed that way. I mean, I'm making plans for it right now, and I just want us to all go into this with our eyes open. Over.
Admiral. Thank you, sir. The situation now is we have one ship, one carrier strike group in the Western Pacific. It's most people pay attention to, and one in the Arabian Gulf, and that's fine for now. But what we don't have, we normally have 3 amphibious ready groups and 3 carrier strike groups ready to respond. And that, when ready to respond, that means they are fully mission capable. They have their essential task list trained up. We have 1 of each now, and we usually have 3. So that's before you take $4 billion of shortfall and roll it into FY14. We will, as the Commandant said, we have invested in making sure that the next to deploy, they're training now, the maintenance is getting done on those, and those next to deploy will deploy. But those that are back here, your surge force, your response force, will drift further into a more unready position, if you will, a C rating, a lower C rating, C3, C4. So to give you a number, we normally have maybe half of the ships who are getting ready to deploy at C3, C4, and can be ramped up relatively quickly. We'll now have 2 out of 3 at C3, C4. So it's the response force that takes the issue at first. We will be able to make up almost all of the ship maintenance that was deferred here when we were in the continuing resolution as we get through the remainder of the year, assuming we get the reprogramming that the Congress will consider here shortly. Next year, again, you roll over what was $9 billion, and if you add 14, again, $23 billion, there'll be a lot of ship maintenance that we'll have to defer. And I have a similar issue with the Commandant. You have to balance the force structure you hold today, the fleet of the future, and the readiness. I have to have a ready fleet, have to be able to respond, like the Commandant said. So we are out where it matters, ready when it matters first. The problem will be, do we retire more ships, and how many? Well, the sequestration numbers we're looking at, if it rolls year by year by year, that could get up to 30 ships retired. And so instead of being at 295 at the end of this decade, I could be at 265, 270, somewhere in that ballpark. Depends on how you distribute the numbers. There are many scenarios. That's one. Last point I'd make is the industrial base. The ship industrial base today is very tightly wound. We have 2 major builders and 5 total shipyards. If we start unraveling multi-year procurements, some of the great performance, Secretary Mabus, very true that he articulated earlier, performance will start unraveling. We won't get that great cost and we won't have, therefore, that performance. And if you start falling behind in there, it took us a long time to get where we are today, which is pretty good performance by the shipbuilders. That will drift, and I don't know how long it'll take to get it back. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Warma. Excellent questions, and that's why we're so focused on the number of ships actually that are prepared for combat. Support is one thing, but ships that are prepared for combat. Mr. Kingston and then Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Amos, General Amos, I wanted to mention Townsend Bombing Range, which is on page 21 of your testimony.
Move your mic a little closer to your mouth.
We don't really need to engage in it now, but your proposal is to expand it from 5,000 to 28,000 acres. That's real important land for a very small community that does not have a large economy, and that hurts their ability to grow. It's right next to I-95, and it's fairly good real estate, not prime, but next to prime real estate, literally. And there's big pushback by the county, and I share their concerns. It's a big grab. We've been working with your folks on it, but so far, I don't think the sensitivity to the local concern has been there to the level that it has been. In fact, some of it's been kind of insulting that, okay, we'll open up an office down there. Well, that's not the same as the county's ability to attract an industry or, build a complex of neighborhood development that would really add to their tax base. So I just wanted to, make sure that we have a lot of concerns about that, and my office can't speak for the senators about it, but I know that the locals are very worried about the big expansion of that bombing range in Townsend. So just want to mention that. Admiral, I have to ask you a question that I'm not trying to drag in Benghazi to this hearing, but I have to respond to your response to Mr. Cole, when you said that what your goal is to be where it matters, when it matters. How does that apply to a Benghazi or a future Benghazi, on a disconnection? Because surely right after Libya, there were troops nearby and available, maybe not within a couple of hours, but that discussion is being held, of course, as you know, but talk to me about how that would apply, because it seems to me that was just one of the lowest points for America in the last year in terms of letting 4 of our citizens die when there were assets nearby. So again, the theme, and I like the theme, I think every American, everybody would agree, be where it matters, when it matters, but we weren't there for our fellow citizens. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, sir. As one that organizes, trains, equips, and provides for the combatant commander, I keep referring to the chartlet, and it is what are we doing to increase forward, as much as feasible, naval forces, as the commandant and I were saying, to be able to respond. And so we are building ships that can help support that. We have a ship called the Mobile Landing Platform, which is volume, persistence, seaborne, out and about, that can support, when it's used as in a float forward staging base with a deck, and those are under construction.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I don't want you to run the clock out either.
It's providing those ships forward and providing that platform.
So would that prevent a future Benghazi where we would say, hey, look, you had folks on the ground, you had folks in the water, you had folks in the air, nearby to make sure we don't lose another ambassador if something like that happens?
I can't speak to the exact details of that because I just don't have that knowledge here. But I would like to shorten time distance at every conceivable effort and be in those key and critical areas, the maritime crossroads. So if you look on there and you look at the places and around where we'll have the vessels, the right kind of vessels, those that resonate with the needs of the combatant commanders of the future, that's what I'm about.
Mr. Secretary, somewhat related to that, I've always been curious as to why Libya and Tunisia are in AFRICOM and Egypt is in CENTCOM, even though they're both sort of Arab Africa. It would appear to me that they would be better off being in CENTCOM, but do you have any thoughts on that? And would that have made any difference in Benghazi, or would we have a greater understanding of kind of a Middle Eastern type nation, even if it's in Africa, if it was in another command?
Congressman, I don't know why the line was drawn where it was. And to the CNO's point, we try to have forces forward deployed, forward stationed, and flexible and ready to meet any eventuality. One of the things that the Marine Corps has stood up is a special purpose Marine Air Ground Task Force for very rapid response for any sort of situation that may happen, and it's being stood up in Europe now.
Well, like Mr. Cole, I appreciate what's going on in Sigonella and Aviano and Vincenza, another branch, but Rhoda and so forth, and I think you are in the right place that you need to be. I just want to make sure that the connections are there. Mr. Secretary, I have one more question if I have time. On the green fleet, I think that has been an admirable investment, but I think that with sequestration, budget cuts in general, and the high expense of it, it might be better, and the fact that the USDA is not kicking in as they should be, and you're brunting the whole cost of it. Is it not time to say, look, we're going to have to hold this for a future, a future Navy?
I think, in fact, just exactly the opposite. That we cannot afford not to do this now, Congressman. In the last 2 years, FY11 and FY12, the Navy has gotten almost $1 billion additional fuel bill because of the spikes in the price of oil. We can't afford that. That comes out of operations. That comes out of platforms. We have got to have a cost-competitive, domestically produced, stable fuel supply, and that is what we're doing. Well, actually, agriculture has kicked in its entire amount. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral, and General Amos, Mr. Secretary, thank you. I would like to just, on Mr. Kingston's issue with the local issue there, we have a 21,000-acre Camp Ravenna in Ohio, and we would welcome you to come up. So if we can make a deal here, Mr. Kingston. So much for Southern hospitality. That's all I'm going to say.
It's only bombs.
At ease. At ease.
And I'd also like to just say with Mr. Bonner's comments, I think that would be a great trip for us to re-engage the defense industrial base. And I look around this committee here and I see members of Congress from older industrial areas like Toledo or Youngstown or Gary, Indiana, and many in the South like Mobile, how we can work together as a committee to drive this investment back into some of these older communities. So I think that would be a great opportunity, and love to work with you on that. The issue I want to get to is the issue of suicide within the Navy and the Marines, and then also suicide prevention. And I know both in the Army and in the Marines there have been experiments and innovative approaches to try to deal with preventing post-traumatic stress. And I won't get into the whole science like I did in the last hearing, but the more and more we learn through neuroscientific research, the more and more we're finding out how the brain works, and the more we're finding out how we can actually build up resiliency in our own brains. So I want to thank Navy research and Navy health research, and also the Army for looking at alternative ways to build up this resiliency. So I guess I would open it up to everybody, but I know General Amos and I have talked about this on several occasions, but if you can just comment on what you think some of the better programs that you have implemented for increasing resiliency and preventing post-traumatic stress in the long run, because I know there have been a couple studies, and what it's showing is that there's actually a depletion in cognitive ability before we even leave, before the soldiers and Marines and airmen they even leave. There's a depletion, so they're already starting below their baseline level. So I think this is very important. And just General Amos, if you could start.
Congressman, I'll be happy to. And you're right. We've talked about the Mind Fitness. We're continuing with that program right now, and I think I'm very enthusiastic about it, and ONR, Office of Naval Research, is funding that for us. So I'm into that. But I was just at Camp Pendleton just probably 3 weeks ago, and spent time in the Advanced Infantry Immersion Trainer, the improved. I mean, this is so. To your point, how do you take a young Marine who's never been in combat, and not only immerse them in the chaos and the anxiety and the absolute abject fear of what's going to happen next, and get them to a point where they're listening, they're thinking, they're actually able to operate as a team cohesively in an environment that is just absolute chaos. And we built about 5 or 6 years ago the original immersion trainer, where we actually inside a factory made it like the streets of Ramadi and Fallujah. The smells, the noise, everything, the language, the everything, to include munitions going off and flying over your head. We spent through Congress has helped us to build a new facility, and we opened it about 1.5 years ago. And that really allows a unit to go through. It's a platoon-sized unit that will go through this thing. So how does that fit with resiliency? You've got to be able to help a young man or woman understand that they're going to be okay. So their mind doesn't just trip out on them to the point where it maybe never recovers again. In other words, you're not able to reach back and pull that back. So if we gradually build them into an environment where we're actually building kind of callus on them, so to speak, we found that helps probably more than anything else. It also makes them more survivable, because the statistics are proven. If you can survive the first 2 or 3 major firefights, then you have a very good chance of surviving the rest of the deployment. So we do that. But beyond that, to the left of that, so that's an important part, but to the left of that is spiritual fitness with our chaplains. It's physical fitness. All of this fits in there to make the whole Marine or whole sailor to where you actually are now resilient enough to where when you get a Dear John letter from your girlfriend or your wife, and that's a big deal with regards to suicides, and you know that. When things begin to unravel at home and you're up to your neck in the things that you are up to in combat, you're able to just say, okay, I'm going to be all right. And so it's spiritual fitness, it's mental fitness, it's physical fitness, it's combat readiness. The best thing we can do is immerse them in this kinds of behavioral training before they go, Congressman.
And I think it's important, too, to recognize that training is great prevention, but it also is helpful after, when these soldiers and Marines get back. Some of the skills that they're learning early on are the same skills they would need to deal with those situations when they get back.
Sir, you're absolutely right. In fact, what's interesting is they've found in some of the more severe cases, they've been able to actually take the young Marine and put him back in that immersive trainer that I was just talking about, and then dial back the experience to get him back to where it was beforehand. And it sounds crazy, but it works not in every case, but in some cases where you can recreate it and then you just dial it back and go, you're going to be okay. So you're absolutely right, sir. Thanks for your support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to add one comment. The similar techniques are being used for kids in schools that have some levels of post-traumatic stress. I mean, if you're a kid living in a tough neighborhood and a school or a family where you see other kids get killed, and you're not 20, you're 8, some of these same techniques and skills are being used in schools and healthcare. And as I mentioned last time, I think it's something that this committee could really make a push on, whether it's in the military schools or in other schools around the country, that can save us a lot of trouble and money in the long run. I'd like to thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Admiral Greenert, Bill Gertz reports often on defense spending and assessments of capabilities, and he yesterday had a pretty interesting perspective on the Pentagon's most recent assessment of China's military power, and he wrote, and I quote, China is building 2 new classes of missile submarines in addition to the 8 nuclear missile submarines, and 6 attack submarines are being deployed as part of an arms buildup that analysts say appears to put Beijing on the war footing, end of quotation marks. Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary for East Asia, David Helvey, told a briefing yesterday that the Chinese are deploying an aircraft carrier killing ballistic missile, 2 new stealth jet fighters, a new road mobile intercontinental ballistic missile, in addition to 3 other new ICBMs. Of particular concern to the Pentagon is the deployment near Taiwan of a precision-guided DF-2 ID anti-ship ballistic missiles. That's quite an arsenal. That's quite a statement. You do represent the tip of the spear in the Western Pacific, and we constantly have this challenge where the Chinese are out there in force. Access issues. Where do you see the Chinese going relative to some of these systems? And getting to Mr. Womack's your response to how capable we are as a nation meeting these potential threats?
Well, staying within the classification of the room, I'll take to the very popular discussion on the DF-21D, the anti-ship ballistic missile. You got to look at it as a kill chain, I think, Congressman. In other words, to do such a thing, you have to have the sensor, you have to detect a ship, you have to recognize it is a ship, you have to then be confident that you got it well enough, then you got to have a tracking solution, then you got to be comfortable you can launch, it launches, it's going in the right direction, then it has to adjust itself. So at that point, you can spoof it, you can jam it, you can try and shoot it down, and as it gets closer, you can put a wall of lead up. And that whole chain of events has to successfully occur if you're the other side. In a defensive measure, you got to break a couple of those chains, and that's what we look at, frankly. So it is, many people focus on the bullet on the bullet. So what I would tell you is sort of comprehensive. Within the classification of this room, there's a lot of effort going on, has been, and we're making great progress, and I'm pretty comfortable where we are. Where are they going? Well, Congressman, we own the undersea domain, and I have a lot of empirical data that tells me exactly that. It would appear to me, based on the construction program, and it kind of is logical, that China wants to modernize.
They're building a lot of subs. They're building a lot of diesels. They're building nuclear subs, and
yep, and they have a lot of old ones that they need to replace that are kind of junky, and they're moving in that direction, but they're not there yet. And so our job is to remain owning the undersea domain.
So what about their Blue Navy, their projections?
Their Blue Navy, their projections. Frankly, we had a conversation.
There's a challenge sometimes in this room here. We over the years, some of your predecessors have sort of discounted the growing China military buildup, but in reality, the Chinese are getting really geared up here.
They are absolutely capable.
And I don't mean to put them in an adversarial way, but in reality, constantly, even though sometimes people discount it, they are challenging us on the high seas, and what they consider to be their backyard, which seems to be a growing backyard, where traditionally we've had access.
Yeah, I would say, Congressman, they're reasonably comfortable operating within what we call the first island chain, and that would be the Philippine Islands, Japan, down through Singapore, in toward China. They view that as what they call the near sea, and they're pretty comfortable operating there. They have very capable individual platforms that they are now starting to put to sea. The ability to network, to bring them together in an effective manner is somewhat of question. But I would submit we have an opportunity here as well to operate together, and we're working in that very direction. Doesn't have to be adversarial.
But they seem to have a pretty adversarial situation in terms of their relationships with the Philippines, with Vietnam. I mean, not only are we confronted, those countries are confronted as well. And obviously, the Philippines have been a strong ally of ours.
There are episodically, as in territorial claims, there are some issues there. But there's also cooperative issues also going on between the Chinese, the Vietnamese, and the Philippines with regarding piracy, smuggling, and other issues. And I would submit China's going to take part in RIMPAC 14, Rim of the Pacific exercise in 2014, in a very tangible, substantial manner. It's a big opportunity, Congressman.
So it does or doesn't worry you about their arms buildup here?
I just say I'm vigilant. I hate to say worry yet because I'm not necessarily worried. Very vigilant, and we need to pay attention and understand the intent and challenge them on that intent.
Mr. Thank
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of quick comments. One, two of my colleagues have mentioned the issue of sexual assault, and I would add my voice to theirs. I don't have a question, but I realize all the intense pressure you're under between continuing resolutions, sequestrations, your responsibility. I have no doubt about your sincerity in addressing the issue. We just urge persistence every day in the uniformed services and appreciate your good efforts. Secondly, in the conversation with Mr. Ryan about suicide, Admiral, I note that there is a task force and they're looking to revise the current collection of 123 suicide programs in the Department of the Navy. And my first impression reading that number is if I have 123 programs, I don't have any. So would hope that as the task force examines that there's some focus on the programs that work, and we certainly address that. A couple of questions, and I realize we want to get to another round, and so I guess more I'm asking for your impressions, if you would, and if you want to fill the answers out for the record, that'd be great. Admiral, you mentioned in your testimony that today the fleet is about 10% smaller than it was 10 years ago. That the time away from home per ship on average is about 15% more. We have the rebalance towards the Pacific. The question really is what programs are in place dealing with the operational tempo, both as far as the force structure of the ships as well as Navy support. And again, I have two more quick questions I'd like to slide in. If you could just give me a capsule summary.
Well, to lower the operational tempo, you got to fill in the gaps that are in the ship because if people are not transitioning off the ship because they're on hold so that because the ship needs them, then you have the individual tempo, I-tempo. That's what we need to track, and we are. We used to do this 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I've revised it, so I'm tracking the individual tempo, not just the ship. But you've got to have the capacity in the shipyard to make sure everybody gets out of the shipyard, gets trained, and is ready to deploy so that those who are on deployment aren't filling in longer than they need to be, so that the rotation is proper. You've got a man to make sure the gaps, as I mentioned before, are properly done there. And then I would say, as I mentioned before, operating forward, if you look on the chartlet, as we migrate more ships forward in these opportunities in Rota, in Bahrain, in Singapore, you're not doing as many rotational deployments. It takes 4 ships on the east or west coast to keep one forward. One's there, one's on its way back, one's on its way over, and one's in deep maintenance. So the more we can get out and about in these places, the less wear rotating ships and forces out there.
I understand that you're about 7,000 sailors short of its goal as far as at-sea manning. What types of personnel initiatives and tools are available to you? Will the opening of previously closed bills to women help you? How do you plan to address that problem?
What's available is urging people to go to sea, so you pay them a little bit of money to shorten their time, their shore tour, if you will, and say,
you're in the Navy, doesn't everybody want to go to sea?
That could be a topic for another discussion, I guess. They do. There are many that do, sincerely. But urge people to get to sea. Then sea duty has to be where a clear message. This is where you hone your skills and where you advance. That's where you make your career. And so I want to sharpen that focus and make sure our folks understand and that our walk is better, equals our talk. in that regard, and we're working on that in that regard. So you want to incentivize people, if you will, to go to sea, and that will help with our gaps. Plus, we're growing. In our submission, as I mentioned, a net increase of 4,600 in our 2014 budget, and we're increasing by 2,000 in FY13, despite these, interruptions, if you will. So we're growing, and part of it is covering those gaps.
Admiral, thank you very much. Last question, if I could, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, on the dispersal of capital ships, on the East Coast now, all of our carriers end up at Norfolk. At one point, and of course it was almost an aberration, you had 5 carriers in one port. On the West Coast, they're dispersed between 3 different ports. Is it a money issue as far as that dispersal on the East Coast of these ships? I'm thinking of 5 carriers in one spot at one moment in time.
It is a money issue. As I explained to Mr. Crenshaw a little earlier, it had been the plan to put a carrier and strike group in Mayport, but in order to do that, you have to build a secure nuclear facility.
I'm sorry, if you've covered that with Mr. Crenshaw, I missed that. If you cover that for the record, I'm done. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Voskalowski. Ms. Granger.
This will be very quick. One thing, I like the idea of us seeing what we're talking about and making a trip. I'd like us to go to Texas to see the Joint Strike Fighter, which is one of our largest and the most unique. But on the sexual assault, several years ago, I was served on the Board of Visitors for the Air Force Academy, and we had a very serious scandal about sexual assault, and spent a long time studying the issue and really get into attitudes and what could be done physically with rearrangements, and it was very good work. It was very painful, but it was very good, and I would certainly suggest that you look at that, because it pertained to lots of things, and one thing that was really startling was the attitude. And the attitude at that academy at that time, with professors and students, 20% did not believe that women should be in the military, and were very negative toward having women there. So their attitudes were different if you're talking about your team. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm very much tempted to point out that the committee is concerned that the manning plan for the littoral combat ship is unrealistic and unsustainable, because no other ship requires contractors throughout the entire deployment to handle regular maintenance requirements that are traditionally handled by the sailors themselves. We have to have contractors on board. But since Joe is no longer here, and because I sense my father, who was a Navy commander, is rolling over in his grave, I'm going to move over to the Marines. So, General Amos, the Marine Corps intends to declare the F-35 operational capable by 2015 with software. It's called Build 2B. But you know that that software is not capable for full mission capability. You have to have this software called Build 3F, and that's not available until 2017 at the very earliest. Admiral Greenert, on the other hand, has taken a much more deliberate approach. He says that the F-35C won't be operationally capable until he has this updated software in place. So I guess the question is, why is the Marine Corps intent on declaring operational capability on a 5th generation fighter that simply will not be able to execute the tactical missions that are assigned to it because it doesn't have the software that is capable of doing that?
Congressman, the fact of the matter is that program officer, program manager, General Bogdan, went on record here just a little bit ago saying that he had confidence that the 2B software would be ready to go in time to meet the IOC of the Marine Corps of 2015. The software in 2B will provide a more capable platform than we currently have in the entire United States Marine Corps today. It will provide an airplane that will deliver more weapons, be more capable, be stealthier, have more capabilities, more information assurance, more information dominance than anything we're flying today in the United States Marine Corps. So why wouldn't we want to be able to have that airplane? It's not going to deploy till 2017. That's the first deployment. But the IOC definition is 10 airplanes, pilots ready to go, maintainers ready to go, the software system with regards to the maintenance of the airplane ready to go, ships capable, we'll have the Boxer ready to go, we've got the Wasp ready to go now. If our nation needed that airplane, this will be the sole 5th generation squadron that will be available for the entire United States of America. I would say that that's a pretty good risk that we can assume, Congressman.
Well, Mr. Chairman, and I won't ask any further questions, but with regard to the risk, this less advanced software is not able to execute the full range of directed mission sets. The Navy is waiting until we have the more advanced software before it declares the F-35 is IOC, operational capable, and the Marine Corps is going with software that's, we were told, is not operationally capable. So I do think it's an issue, but I'm not going to pursue it any further because there are others that need to ask questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Mr. Crenshaw.
Just I have a quick follow-up question about the cruisers, but I wanted to thank Mr. Visklosky for raising that question and assure you I didn't tell him to ask that question.
And if the gentleman would yield for 1 second, because I didn't realize you had that conversation. If you could, for the record, attach a dollar amount as to what we're looking for, and is that built into your 5-year plan, I'd appreciate. I'm sorry. Thank you, John.
And I'd love to sit down and visit with you about some of the things we've talked about, because I do think it's important. But on the cruisers, I didn't get a chance to ask you the money that we put in 13 and 14 to do the upgrades, modernization. Is there a plan? Because I know you said in 15 you're still thinking about decommission, but is there a plan to use those monies that we set aside?
There is, sir, in accordance with the bill, and that plan has been put together and is on its way to be briefed to the
Can you tell us anything about it? Because, I mean, as we get ready to mark up the bill, it'd be important to have that.
I believe, and again, I'll give you for the record, it's about it's in increments, $250 million operating costs and some upgrades for some of the cruisers. And you got to watch the schedules, and that's where we kind of get into this. We got it now instead of the beginning of the year, so we do our best through 13 into 14.
Great. Well, it'd be helpful when we get ready to mark up. Thank you, sir.
Just for the record, the cruisers that you're referring to, they're going out of the fleet at some point in time. Is that right or not?
At some point in time,
they
yes,
are.
sir.
So they are part of what's actually the fleet size at the moment?
The fleet size at the moment is 283 ships.
83, and how many are actually operational? The ones that you refer to, are they operational, or are they in dry dock getting reworked?
They're operational.
They're operational.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Crenshaw. Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I can't invite you all to a military base in Minnesota, but you can go see the USS Minnesota submarine. I wanted to talk about something that we haven't touched on directly, but indirectly it affects recruiting and retention. And I had the opportunity to be at Pendleton back a while ago and saw what you were doing for not only military construction for your Marines, but what you were doing with the public-private partnership that you have with housing. And so my question is, as you're moving forward with those projects, sequestration and budget cuts, what does that do to that? Because that can have a direct impact on retention and even recruitment. If you're recruiting people with families, word gets out whether you take care of your sailors and Marines. And then also what you're doing, and this is probably more to Pendleton, what you're doing to reduce your energy footprint to be more energy efficient at Pendleton, and maybe what you're doing at other bases too.
Congresswoman, thank you. On the PPV matter, and you know this, that has been one of the great success stories, I think, in the Department of Defense. And for us in the Marine Corps, we're not completely built out as far as transitioning the homes. We've got a few more home project, in other words, tranches of homes in the PPV project line. I'll have to get back to you and tell you exactly which ones and how many. I know we've got some more 29 Palms. But as I look at the Corps writ large, and I look at the barracks and the military construction that this committee has supported for us for the last 4 or 5 years, we're talking billions and billions of dollars. Our barracks are better than they've ever been before, so the quality of life for our young enlisted Marines living on board the base, which is important to us, has never been better than it is today. So that's the first point, and that actually helps with regards to retention and just morale and discipline. Because we've got them on the base, we've got eyes on them, so we're watching them. The housing situation is just about that good. It's an incentive for Marines when it's, not particularly when they come in to sign up from the recruiter's office, but when they're at that decision point at the 4-year mark and they're trying to decide, okay, do I want to stay in the Marine Corps? You recruit a Marine, you retain a family. And so the families have an awful lot to say about this with regards to quality of life. So from where I sit right now, it's never been better. As we draw the force down, my sense is, and especially as it relates to barracks, we're probably going to finally get to a point where we've got just about the right amount of barracks as we have, because we've never built enough. We'll probably get to a point where we'll have just about the right amount of new barracks for the right size force, and I think it'll probably be the same thing for housing. But there are other projects underway, and I'll make sure that I get you that information.
Simply put, we had a huge housing deficit, and they were substandard. Today, really just a result of public-private ventures, over 90% of Navy housing is private-public venture. As the Commandant said, it's high quality, and we would have taken decades to get there using military construction. So some contracts are better than others, and we're learning more, but it's working quite well, and we find our constituents, families are very happy. It's a very popular measure. Lastly, I'd say these are contracts, ma'am, and even in a sequestration environment, we have to live up to our contracts.
I'll take the energy part. We're doing a lot on both more efficiencies. The Marines at Kaneohe Bay, for example, measure the energy that goes into each house. If a Marine and a family use less energy than the benchmark, they get money back. If they use more energy than the benchmark, they owe a little. And the energy usage has dropped dramatically with no compromise to the quality of life. We're also doing alternative energy at places like Kaneohe Bay, at 29 Palms, at China Lake, at facilities all around the country, and we will be at a gigawatt of renewable energy in public-private ventures like the housing by the end of this decade.
Thank you, Ms. McCollum. Just for the record, General, do we have any more gang barracks at Pendleton, or have they all been done away with? What I'd call gang barracks, something I remember.
I know exactly
Not
what
there,
you're
but
talking. Let me
Army.
get back to you on that thing.
Okay.
I don't want to, I'm really bullish on where we are. Well, we used to call them the flat tops out there, which were absolutely.
Well, it looks like hell. I haven't been out there for a while.
They
but
did. I don't think we've got them, but I don't want to give you a definitive answer.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Calvert.
I'm just happy everybody's bringing up Camp Pendleton. It's a wonderful base. You all need to come on out. Speaking of Camp Pendleton, there's one thing that we've done a wonderful job. I give David Hobson a lot of credit, our former colleague, on these public-private partnerships and bases all around the world, and how that's been a very successful program and putting together great housing for our military. But the fire stations at Camp Pendleton are getting a little long in the tooth. I think they were built in 1941, and they haven't changed a lot. So I just thought I'd bring that up since I hear from just bring that note up. Everything else will read below.
We don't have any more earmarks, so that's just
I
added
know,
to the
that's why I
list.
bring it up.
Congressman, they're historical landmarks, and we can't turn them down.
That's it. One thing that's also getting kind of long in the tooth is I was out at Yuma, and those Harriers are getting pretty long in the tooth. I imagine they're pretty costly to maintain also. And we talk about the F-35 and the Marine Corps variant. How much longer can you safely fly the Harriers?
Sure. Interestingly, you'll be surprised when I tell you they actually have the most service life of between the F-18s and the Harriers. What happened right around 1999, 2000? We took those airplanes and remanufactured them. We sent them back to then McDonnell Douglas, now Boeing, and they took them completely apart. And they rebuilt those airplanes and gave them, they breathed new life, probably a remanufacturing like we've never seen in an airplane. So those airplanes will actually begin, the final ones will begin to expire in flight life around 2028, as I recall. Our F-18s are going to expire in service life long before then. So the last Harrier, as we transition to the Joint Strike Fighter, the very last squadrons that will transition will be the Harrier squadrons. Not across all Harrier squadrons, but the very last airplanes that actually go to Davis-Monthan will be the Harriers.
And Mr. Secretary, back on the submarine, on the Virginia-class submarines, on your advanced funding on FY14-15, obviously that's a little outside of carriers and amphibious ships. We haven't done that type of funding before, the split funding and counting on advance appropriations. Why did you go that method versus the traditional method of funding for the ships?
In a very short answer, the amount of money available. But I would point out that just as you did, that we have split funded amphibs and carriers. This is not an incremental funding because this committee and Congress would make a decision for full funding. It would split it over 2 fiscal years. You've already done advanced procurement for this 10th submarine, and the overwhelming logic for this is that by putting the 10th submarine in this 5 years, so 2 a year, into the multi-year, will save us $150 million per boat. So $1.5 billion over the 10 boats.
That's a good answer. That's a good answer. One last question. I don't know if this is for the Admiral or the Secretary. The new electronic magnetic launch capability that is going on the new CVN, is all the technicalities worked out? That's working fine and everything's going well with that program?
Well, I think the science and the engineering is worked out. Now we've got to continue the tests. So when you say technicalities, there'll be hitches here or there, but with regard to does it work, it works. We've launched several things from it. Now we need to install it and test it and get through that testing period.
Okay. Again, thank you for your service. I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Cowell. Ms. Capter, and we're going to move towards winding down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 questions. Mr. Secretary, yesterday in USA Today, they had this article about defense spending $15 billion a year on fuel, 60% of it from foreign sources. And in the Department of Navy, your goal is 50% total energy for the Navy from alternative energy sources by 2020. Does the department have a goal of reducing that foreign dependence? And I agree with your goal of 50% alternative energy by 2020, but can't we speed it up a bit? And how much of the 2014 budget request is devoted to securing these alternative energy sources? That's my question to you. And then of General Amos, I wanted to ask on the amphibious combat vehicle, what is the current status of the program, and how does it relate to the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle? How do those 2 programs fit together, if at all? And I would just ask you, following on what Congressman Ryan talked about, the parts of the country that have suffered under enormous unemployment for a very long time related to the defense industrial base and what's happened to our overground transportation industry, please look at the Fourth Seacoast. Please look at the Great Lakes area. It doesn't get as much attention, although I will say Marine Week in Cleveland last year was a huge success. General, we thank you for that. We invite both you and the Secretary to the Cleveland City Club to tell us about the Navy, but we often feel neglected up there. You know, we have the Great Lakes Training Station, but if you look at the number of Marines and naval seamen that come from our area, we had Sailor of the Year from Toledo, Ohio a couple years ago. And we ask you to think about our region as an integral part of this nation's defense. And again, we invite you there. So, Mr. Secretary, on the alternative energy question, and General Amos on the alternative amphibious combat vehicle. Okay.
Thank you, Congresswoman. The goal is to move from buying these foreign sources of energy to a domestically produced, stably priced source. And the 50% goal is not just at sea, but also on shore. So it's Navy-wide, Navy and Marine Corps-wide. We're on track to meet that and meet it at very competitive prices. In terms of the budget, what I would like to do is get you a detailed written analysis of the investments we are making and the payback time that those investments will return the money, and we will continue saving money. It's a long but a very good story, and I would like to do that in writing if that's permissible.
Are your goals attainable in view of what's happening with sequestration?
Yes, they are.
Ms. Capter.
Magnificent. And then General Amos, Mr. Chairman.
General.
Congresswoman, you remember in the fall of 2010, Secretary Mabus and I and Secretary Gates met and talked about the Expeditionary Fighting Vehicle at that time, which is our swimming tractor that brings Marines ashore. We agreed to cancel that because of a host of reasons, which you're very familiar with. In the last a little over 2 years, 2.5 years, we have invested as much brain power and capital to determine, okay, what is it, the vehicle that will replace the EFV? That actually will replace the current vehicle we have, which is 40 years old. What should that look like? How fast should it go? What should the capabilities be? And even as importantly, how much can we afford? What's the cost on that? OSD last year, and they published the results in July, did an analysis of alternatives and confirmed the requirement for the Marine Corps to have a vehicle that will come out the back end of an amphibious ship and carry Marines ashore. You want to come out of a ship one of two ways. You either fly them off or you come across the surface, and we need both capabilities for the future. So they confirmed that, and they were prepared to kind of lead us into a solution. I put all that on hold because we had one more bite at the apple. I wanted to make sure that we absolutely got the requirements right. So that's where we are right now. We have the final study group, analysis group, that will report back to me in the fall of this year. And at that point, we'll make a determination on cost. We've got two contractors heavily involved in this right now, BAE and General Dynamics. They're joined at the hip on this thing. So we've got it's more than best of breed. It's actually the best of both corporations helping us come up with the art of the possible. We'll make a decision probably late fall, early next year as to go, this is the direction we're going to go, and we'll get on with the contract for an amphibious combat vehicle. The Joint Light Tactical Vehicle was designed to be a replacement for the Humvee. It's a utility vehicle. We're going to buy 5,500 of these things right now, so we're in it. It's completely different. It's just to haul Marines around the battlefield.
Thank you, Ms. Captain. Thank you, General. Mr. Cole, then Mr. Womack.
Thank you, and I'll be quick. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just really have one question, and I want to make sure I understood something right and maybe ask you, Mr. Secretary, to elaborate on it. And let me just say as a preface, look, all of us in here on both sides of the aisle hate sequester. We really do, and we appreciate what you've had to deal with and the other service chiefs. And I would suspect that if the powers that be sort of above this committee could come to a larger deal, you would find both sides of the aisle on this committee would probably be supportive of that so that we could restore some of what has been lost and some of what's created such difficulty. Now, if I understood your original testimony, you made the point that you were planning for sequester. You were planning as if it was extended. And I'm glad you are, by the way. I think that's the prudent and the appropriate thing to do. I will say for the record, you're the first person from the administration's budget doesn't presume that in most other areas. I mean, they assume the sequester disappears. I've had this discussion on other subcommittees with civilian counterparts and expressed my concern that they were, well, I hope they were right. You know, my concern was you better not plan that way. So am I correct in thinking that you are planning as if this, I mean, I'm sure you're hoping for something different and better. We are too. But are you planning as if the sequester would extend forward?
The budget that we put in assumed that sequester would not happen. The strategic management and choices group that's ongoing at the Pentagon is looking at the possible budget futures, including sequestration continuing. What would that do to all the services, Navy and Marine Corps included? So we're doing both.
Well, I just want to commend you for doing both. Again, I hope that we're not in that situation. I know this committee certainly doesn't, but I think you're being exceptionally prudent and wise, and just thank you for doing so.
I want to echo Mr. Cole's comment. We hate the sequester. We don't like the continuing resolution, but at least we were able, and you acknowledge it, put in there, give the flexibility to you, maybe not enough flexibility. Mr. Womack.
One final question for the Secretary, our role in cybercom.
We stood up 10th Fleet, which is our cyber capability that supports cybercom. We are growing cyber capability, both inside the Navy and in conjunction with cybercom, both in terms of number of people and in terms of capability. The Marine Corps, even though it's coming down in overall people, are increasing the number of Marines involved in cyber because it is such an important area for the future.
Mr. Womack, thank you. Good. Lastly, the number of ships matter. I'm concerned. I know last year when I asked the question, people rushed to my office to show me a lot of numbers. We've never had over the last 20 years, have we, Admiral, more than 300 ships?
We've never had more than 300?
300, yeah. When's the, in terms of our, we have a stated requirement now of 306 ships.
That's correct. Yes,
when's the last time we've had over 300 ships?
Well, in 2001, we had 313.
Did we have 300?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the mix of ships, could you comment on that? I mean, I know we're counting numbers here, but in reality, it appears we have less in the way of combat-related ships and more numbers that relate to support.
Well, actually, when you look at, if you look at the 306 study, we need 88 large surface combatants, cruisers and destroyers. We're very close to that. We have 83, 84 now, and we'll grow to that number quickly. We have the right number of carriers under construction. We have the right number of submarines. This will dip in 2024, and we have the right number of auxiliary ships. And so if there's an area that I am most confident about, it's the combat ships. Where we're short is in small surface combatants and some of our supporting ships that we need.
So we have the ability to pivot to the Pacific.
We have the ability to rebalance.
We have the ability.
Yes, sir, we do.
Tyranny of distance and all that nature. We have the ability to do that.
Under the current defense strategic guidance, what we're required to do, yes, sir, we do. What's important is we've got to develop those places that we would operate those ships out of.
The committee, Mr. Young, wants to extend his thanks, as to all of us, for Mr. Secretary, for your being here. Admiral Greenert, General Amos, and to all the men and women that you represent, the best of America. We want to thank you for your testimony here this morning. I should say this morning and this afternoon. The subcommittee is adjourned until 1 p.m. tomorrow, when we will host Secretary John McHugh and General Ray Odierno to discuss the Department of Army and their needs. The meeting stands adjourned. Again, gentlemen, thank you.